In the heart of a violent coastal storm, where waves slammed against the cliffs of Havenport and the wind screamed like something alive, ex-Army veteran Ethan Ward followed the desperate barking of his German Shepherd Rex down to the drowning beach. Through sheets of rain and the flash of lightning, he saw it. I saw a small yacht stranded on the rocks, its beacon flickering weakly like a dying heartbeat. Climbing aboard, Ethan found chaos. Ropes torn, cabin flooded, the smell of fuel heavy in the air. Then came the shock. A young woman bound and gagged inside the galley, eyes wide with terror. As he cut her free, a shadow rose from the darkness of the engine room, a man with a knife, moving fast and silent. What followed was a struggle between storm and steel, between the ghosts of war and the fury of the sea. When it was over, the waves swallowed the attacker whole, and Ethan stood trembling beside the woman, knowing deep down this was no random wreck. It was the beginning of something darker, and far from over. Before we dive into this story of faith, loyalty, and redemption, tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe that sometimes God sends us help in fur and faith, not in miracles of light. Hit like, share, and subscribe to join our family of stories where every storm hides a purpose. The first storm of the season came roaring in from the Atlantic just after sunset, tearing across the quiet town of Havenport. The wind howled through the pine trees like something ancient had been awakened. Waves crashed against the black rocks below, throwing salt spray into the air and shaking the old window panes of Ethan Ward's cabin. Inside, the fire had burned low. Ethan sat in the worn leather chair by the window, a book forgotten in his lap, his mind wandering as storms often made it do. His German Shepherd Rex lay by the door, ears twitching, muscles tense. At 7 years old, Rex was the kind of dog that carried time in his eyes, intelligent, disciplined, but with a look that said he'd seen too much alongside his master. His sable fur shimmered between black and gold in the flickering light, a contrast to the storm outside. The night had a rhythm to it, wind, thunder, the occasional crack of distant waves. But then, something broke that rhythm. Rex lifted his head suddenly, growling low. Ethan looked up. "What is it, boy?" The growl turned into a sharp bark, then another. Rex bolted for the door, claws scraping the wooden floor. Ethan frowned, pulled on his jacket, a rugged tan-brown work coat faded from years of use, and grabbed the flashlight from the hook. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see what's got your tail twisted." He opened the door, and the wind hit him like a wall. The air was cold, sharp with sea spray. Rex was already running toward the dunes, barking against the storm. Ethan followed, boots sinking into wet sand. The beam of his flashlight wavered through the rain. Beyond the dunes, the beach opened wide, endless gray waves colliding with the shore. Then he saw it, a dark shape caught between the rocks and the surf. At first, he thought it was debris. Then the lightning flashed and the truth burned into view. A small yacht, maybe 30 feet long, half buried in sand and seawater. Its name, barely visible through the storm, Red Silver Wave. Ethan slowed, instincts kicking in. The Coast Guard hadn't reported any wrecks tonight. Something about this felt wrong. The yacht's cabin lights flickered once, weakly, like a dying heartbeat. Rex barked again, circling the wreck, paws splashing in the shallows. Ethan climbed aboard, gripping the railing slick with rain. "Hello?" he shouted. The wind swallowed his voice. No response, just the creaking of metal and the slap of waves against the hull. Inside, the smell hit him first. Diesel, salt, and something metallic beneath it. Blood. His flashlight beam cut through the cabin, revealing overturned chairs, shattered glass, and a trail of water mixed with dark stains. "Easy, Rex," he whispered. Then came the sound, A muffled cry from below deck. Faint. Human. Ethan's heart jolted. He moved quickly, descending the narrow steps to the lower cabin. The light fell on a figure tied to a railing, a young woman, soaked, shivering, her wrists bound with rope. A strip of duct tape covered her mouth. Her eyes were wide, terrified. Ethan crouched beside her, knife flashing as he cut the bindings. "It's all right," he said, voice steady but low. "You're safe now." When he pulled the tape free, she gasped for air, coughing seawater. "Please," she whispered hoarsely, "we have to go. He's still here." Before Ethan could ask, a metallic clang echoed from the engine room. Rex growled, positioning himself between Ethan and the sound. Ethan raised his flashlight toward the narrow corridor. "Who's there?" The answer came in motion, a shadow lunging out of the dark. Ethan caught the glint of a blade just before it swung. He ducked, the knife slicing through the sleeve of his jacket. The man was tall, lean, soaked to the bone, his face half covered by a wet hood. His movements were desperate, not professional, wild survival. Ethan slammed into him, the two men crashing into the metal wall. The flashlight dropped, spinning light across the cabin. The attacker snarled, swinging again. Ethan caught his wrist, twisting hard until the knife clattered to the floor. The man's other hand went for a pistol holster, but Rex lunged, biting deep into his forearm. The man screamed, jerking away, and stumbled toward the hatch. A wave hit the side of the yacht, sending them all off balance. Ethan reached for him, but the man slipped through the doorway and vanished into the storm. Moments later, a single gunshot echoed outside, then silence. Ethan stood in the doorway, rain pelting his face, the beam of his flashlight cutting over the waves. Nothing but white foam and black water. The man was gone. He turned back to the woman who was struggling to stand. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lila," she said, voice trembling. "Lila Cooper." "Lila," Ethan repeated, steadying her by the arm. "What happened here?" She hesitated, glancing toward the dark sea. "It wasn't an accident. They sabotaged the ship. They were after data." She clutched her chest, breathing hard. "I worked for Blue Harbor Mining. I found something I wasn't supposed to." Ethan frowned. "Blue Harbor? The offshore drilling company?" Her eyes filled with fear. "They're not drilling, not legally. They're extracting something else, military salvage, deep-sea tech. I tried to expose it." She shuddered. "They tried to bury me with the evidence." Rex whined softly, pressing his head against her hand. She looked down at him, tears mixing with the rain. "He saved my life." Ethan nodded slowly, scanning the waves again. The wreck creaked underfoot. The tide was rising fast, swallowing the stern. "We need to get you off this boat before she breaks apart." They made their way back to the deck, Lila leaning heavily on his arm. Lightning illuminated the beach ahead. "There," Ethan said, pointing toward the dunes. "We'll take shelter at my cabin." Behind them, the silver wave groaned one last time. As they reached the shore, a sound rolled faintly through the wind, metal grinding against rock, or perhaps something else entirely. Ethan glanced back. For a split second, he thought he saw a shape moving near the wreck, a figure standing at the bow, motionless, watching. Then the next flash of lightning came, and it was gone. He told himself it was a trick of the storm. By the time they reached the cabin, the fire was nearly out. Ethan wrapped Lila in a wool blanket and poured her a glass of water. She sat trembling beside the hearth, color slowly returning to her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You can tell me the rest when you've caught your breath." She nodded, exhaustion overtaking her. Rex lay near her feet, eyes open, keeping watch. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, the only sound was the soft crackle of firewood and the distant call of the sea. Ethan looked once more toward the window, toward the direction of the wreck. A thought gnawed at him, something about the man's last look before the wave took him. Not fear, recognition. And in that moment, Ethan Ward felt the first whisper of something darker than the storm, a past he thought long buried, stirring once more beneath the waves. Morning came pale and heavy, a gray sheet of mist rolling in from the sea. The storm had left Havenport looking battered and raw. Driftwood scattered along the dunes, gulls circling silently over the broken shoreline. Ethan Ward stood outside his cabin with a mug of coffee, his tan-brown jacket still damp from the night before. The ocean roared distantly, calmer now, though he could still smell the salt and oil from the wreck. Inside, the woman he had rescued slept by the fire. Lila Cooper, that was her name. She looked younger in the morning light, late 20s, maybe, but her face carried a tension that spoke of sleepless nights and a mind that refused peace. Her dark hair was tangled from the salt air, skin pale from cold, lips still bruised where the tape had been. She didn't look like someone used to danger. She looked like someone who had run out of places to hide. Rex lay near her feet, head resting on his paws, his temple fur rising and falling with slow breaths. He'd barely slept either, keeping watch through the night. When she stirred, Ethan stepped inside quietly. "You're safe now," he said, setting the mug on the table. "Fire's still warm. You should drink something." Lila sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Her voice was hoarse. "The others. Did you see anyone else on that boat?" Ethan shook his head. "Just you. And whoever attacked us. He didn't make it." She nodded faintly, though her eyes clouded. "Then it's not over. They'll come looking for what's still there." Ethan leaned against the table. "You said they sabotaged your ship. Who are they exactly?" Lila rubbed her hands together for warmth before answering. "Blue Harbor Mining," she said. "At least that's the name they use. Officially, they extract deep-sea minerals for tech manufacturing, but their offshore platform, the one 40 miles east of here, it's not mining manganese. It's digging into wrecks." "Wrecks?" Ethan repeated. She looked up. "Military wrecks, Navy prototypes, things that should have stayed classified." Ethan frowned. "You're saying they're salvaging military tech?" "Stealing it," she corrected. "Rebuilding it, maybe even selling it. I was hired to manage their sonar data. When I found discrepancies in the logs, I started digging. Then I found the cargo manifests, shipments marked as decommissioned material. Only the coordinates didn't match any registered sites." She reached for her bag, unzipping it with shaking hands. Inside was a waterproof drive, scratched but intact. "That's what they want back." Ethan studied her, his mind working quietly. "And the Coast Guard?" Her laugh was short, bitter. "Won't touch it. Blue Harbor's too clean on paper. The moment I reported it, my supervisor transferred me. A week later, my apartment was broken into, and my research partner disappeared." Rex's ears perked at the word disappeared. Ethan took a deep breath, pacing near the window. He'd seen that kind of power before. Money, influence, men who buried truth under paperwork. "You need to disappear for a while," he said. "Let me contact someone I trust." Before Lila could reply, a sound broke the morning calm. A vehicle on the dirt road outside, tires crunching on gravel. Rex growled low, rising to his feet. Ethan's hand went instinctively to the rifle, leaning by the wall. Through the window, he saw a police cruiser pulling up near the fence. The door opened, and out stepped Sheriff Doyle, Havenport's lawman for nearly 20 years. A big man in his 50s, Doyle had the build of an ex-football player gone soft, his uniform too tight around the shoulders. His graying hair was cropped close, his jaw perpetually shadowed with stubble. He walked like someone who'd spent his whole life owning whatever ground he stepped on. "Morning, Ward," Doyle called, voice carrying a forced cheer. "Heard there was trouble near the dunes last night. Coast Guard said something about a distress beacon." Ethan opened the door, but didn't step aside. "Found a wreck. Pulled someone out before it sank." Doyle's eyes shifted to the woman inside. "That her?" Lila froze where she sat. Ethan nodded slowly. "She's shaken, but alive." "Well, let's get some statements," Doyle said. "Maybe she can tell us who the hell's dumping boats on my beach." Ethan didn't move. "It's a federal case, Doyle. Best let the Coast Guard handle it." The sheriff's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sure, but you know how things go. Jurisdiction overlaps. I'll just have a quick chat." Reluctantly, Ethan stepped aside. Doyle walked in, eyes roaming the cabin, the faint smell of damp wood and salt filling the air. "Rough night, huh?" he said to Lila. "You from around here?" She shook her head. "Boston." "That so?" Doyle's gaze lingered on the waterproof case beside her bag. "You bringing research equipment with you?" "It's mine," she said firmly. He chuckled. "Relax, miss, just doing my job." But his eyes said otherwise, sharp, curious, assessing. He turned back to Ethan. "If the Coast Guard asks, tell them I'll file my report by evening. Might need to inspect that wreck myself before the tide swallows it." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You do that, Doyle. Just make sure you find something before someone else does." Doyle gave a small smirk. "Always do, Ward." He tipped his hat, left, and drove off, tires spitting gravel. Lila watched from the window until the cruiser vanished into the fog. "He didn't come to help," she said softly. "No," Ethan agreed. "He came to check if you were still alive." The rest of the day passed uneasily. They avoided speaking much, both aware that Doyle's visit meant others might follow. By evening, the storm clouds began to gather again offshore. Lila sat by the fire, turning the small drive over in her hands like a talisman. Ethan packed a small duffel, maps, a pistol, rations. "If you're right about them, they'll send someone soon. We need to be ready." Lila looked up. "You think they'll find us here?" "They already have eyes in this town," Ethan said. "Doyle's one of them. Maybe not loyal, but bought." Rex barked suddenly, standing rigid. Outside, a faint noise, gravel shifting, footsteps, distant but real. Ethan crossed to the window. Nothing visible but fog. He flicked off the lantern. "Down," he whispered. They crouched in silence. Rex's ears twitched, tracking sound through the walls. After a long moment it passed, the faint crunch of footsteps fading toward the road. Ethan exhaled slowly. "That wasn't Doyle," Lila whispered. "No," Ethan said. "That was someone checking if he'd done his job." When the silence returned, only the wind moved outside. Ethan looked at Rex, then at Lila. "We're leaving tomorrow, before sunrise. There's a place up north, the lighthouse. Someone there owes me a favor." Lila nodded, pulling the blanket tighter. "I trust you." "Don't," Ethan said quietly. "Just keep your head down." Rex lay beside the door again, watching the darkness beyond the window. The faint glow of the dying fire danced across his fur. Outside, the waves rose and fell against the shore, as if whispering secrets to the sand, secrets that had already started to reach Havenport. The fog rolled in before dawn, thick and cold enough to swallow the town whole. Havenport's harbor lights were little more than faint orange glows in the gray, their reflections trembling on the still water. Ethan Ward moved through the empty streets with quiet purpose, his boots echoing softly against wet pavement. Every instinct told him to leave town, but something about last night's visitor, the slow, deliberate footsteps in the gravel, had set his nerves on edge. Whoever was watching them wasn't finished. He made his way toward the back of the old fish market, where a line of rusting dumpsters shielded him from the main road. The police station stood across the street, its windows dark except for one, the sheriff's office. Ethan crouched low, watching through the drifting mist. Inside, Sheriff Doyle sat behind his desk, his bulky frame outlined by the pale yellow glow of his lamp. Across from him stood a stranger, tall, clean-cut, wearing a tailored gray coat that didn't belong in a fishing town. His hair was slicked back, and his movements were sharp, efficient, the kind of man who never entered a room without owning it. Doyle opened a drawer, pulled out a manila envelope, and passed it across the desk. The stranger checked the contents briefly, his face unreadable, then slipped an envelope of his own back toward Doyle. Thicker, heavier. Cash. Ethan watched the exchange through the rain-streaked glass, jaw tightening. The stranger said something, and Doyle nodded, his expression strained. Then, almost as if sensing he was being watched, the man turned toward the window. For a moment, his eyes met Ethan's across the street, cold, assessing, the faintest glimmer of recognition. Ethan ducked instinctively behind the dumpster, heart pounding. When he looked again, the office was dark. By the time he returned to the cabin, the sky was turning silver with morning. Lila sat at the table, eyes red from lack of sleep, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. Rex lay near the door, ears twitching every time the wind brushed against the wall. "You were gone," Lila said quietly. "Had to check something," Ethan replied, shrugging off his jacket. He told her about the meeting, about the stranger with Doyle. "You think he's with Blue Harbor?" she asked. "I'd bet on it," Ethan said. "And if he's here, it means they know where you are." Before she could respond, Rex's head shot up, a low growl rumbling from his chest. Ethan froze. The dog moved to the door, sniffing, muscles rigid. Then, a faint click. The door handle turned, slow and deliberate. Ethan gestured for Lila to stay low, grabbing the rifle from behind the couch. The door burst open. A man in dark tactical gear stepped through, rifle raised, night vision goggles glowing faint green. He moved fast, silent, trained, but not fast enough for Rex. The German shepherd lunged, teeth locking around the man's forearm. The gun fired. Once, the bullet tearing through the ceiling. Ethan closed the distance, slamming his shoulder into the intruder, driving him backward into the wall. They struggled, boots scraping, fists connecting, breath short and sharp. The man was strong, methodical, a professional. Ethan recognized the rhythm instantly, the close-quarters combat of military training. He drove his elbow into the man's ribs, forced the gun from his grip, and pinned him to the floor. "Who sent you?" Ethan demanded. The man grunted, trying to twist free. "You should have stayed dead." His voice was calm, controlled, but there was something desperate under it. Ethan's grip tightened. "Say the name." The man's mouth curled into a faint, cruel smile. "Grady knows you're alive." The name hit like a bullet. Tom Grady. The face he hadn't seen since Kandahar. The officer who'd sold them out. The man responsible for 3 of his team dying in the desert. "Where is he?" Ethan pressed. The intruder's only answer was a sudden jerk, a hidden knife flashing in his hand. Ethan reacted instantly, shoving the weapon aside. The blade grazed his arm, slicing through fabric. They rolled again, knocking over the lamp. Lila shouted, grabbing the fallen pistol, but unsure where to aim. Rex barked furiously, snapping at the man's leg. The struggle ended in a single deafening gunshot. Then silence. The intruder went still, the pistol smoking in Ethan's hand. Blood spread across the wooden floor. Lila froze, trembling. "Is he?" "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "He's done." Rex limped slightly, a shallow cut on his shoulder, but wagged his tail once when Ethan knelt beside him. "Good boy," Ethan murmured, scratching behind his ear. Lila's voice was small. "You knew that name. Grady." Ethan stared at the dead man for a long moment before answering. "He used to be my commanding officer, before he sold us out." He stood, grabbing a tarp from the corner. "Help me." They dragged the body out to the dunes, burying it beneath the wet sand and driftwood before the tide could wash it away. The rain had returned by the time they finished, thin and cold, soaking through their clothes. "Whoever sent him will know he didn't come back," Lila said, voice trembling. "I know," Ethan replied. "That's why we're leaving tonight." Back at the cabin, Ethan searched the dead man's gear. No ID, no insignia, just a small metal tag engraved with a trident and the letters BH Security, Blue Harbor's private contractors. Lila turned the tag in her hand, expression hardening. "They have their own army." Ethan nodded grimly. "And they're cleaning up loose ends." He pulled out a worn notebook from a drawer, military-grade paper, edges yellowed. Inside were old field notes, sketches, and a list of names. One was underlined twice: Tom Grady. "He's behind all of this," Ethan said. "Not just the company, the whole operation." Lila frowned. "But why here? Why Havenport?" "Because it's quiet," Ethan said. "Small-town police, open coastline, deep water access. Perfect place to hide something illegal." Rex barked once, breaking the silence. He stood at the window, tail rigid. Ethan followed his gaze. Down the hill, through the mist, two figures stood near the sheriff's station. One of them was Doyle, the other, the man from the night before, in the gray coat. The man raised a phone to his ear. A moment later, Ethan's landline rang. He didn't move. Lila's breath caught. "Don't answer!" Ethan let it ring 3 times before it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. "They're coming," he said softly. "Time to go find the only man I still trust." Lila looked at him questioningly. "Who?" Ethan glanced toward the lighthouse on the distant cliff, its faint beam cutting through the mist. "Sam Keller," he said. "He was with me in Kandahar. He'll know what Grady's planning." Rex growled once more, as if agreeing. Ethan slung his pack over his shoulder, the trident tag still clenched in his hand. "Get what you need," he told Lila. "We move before sundown." As they stepped out into the gray daylight, the wind shifted. The sea beyond the dunes looked calm again, almost peaceful. But Ethan had been a soldier long enough to know what calm before a storm really meant. The road to Havenport Lighthouse wound along the cliffs like a scar carved by the sea. The sky hung low and iron gray, waves pounding below as if trying to claw their way up the rocks. Ethan Ward drove the old truck in silence, his jaw set, eyes flicking between the road ahead and the side mirror. Behind them, Lila sat wrapped in a thick wool blanket, pale but steadier now. Rex, his sable fur still damp from the rain, lay curled between them, every few seconds lifting his head to sniff the air. The dog hadn't relaxed since they left the cabin. The lighthouse rose from the fog like a phantom, tall, weather-beaten, its white paint chipped away by years of salt and wind. A faint golden light pulsed from its crown, sweeping slowly across the sea. Ethan parked the truck near the edge of the cliffs and stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. "He lives here?" Lila asked, stepping down after him. "Yeah," Ethan said, pulling his jacket tighter. "Sam Keller. We served together overseas. He's not fond of company, but he owes me one." They climbed the narrow path toward the entrance. The door opened before they reached it. Sam Keller stood in the doorway, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a gray-streaked beard and deep-set eyes that looked as if they'd forgotten how to sleep. He wore a heavy flannel shirt under a dark oilskin jacket, and his hands were scarred, rough from years of labor. His voice, when he spoke, was low but steady. "You look like hell, Ward." Ethan smirked faintly. "Good to see you too, Keller." Sam's gaze moved past him to Lila, then to Rex. "You brought guests. That's new." "Long story," Ethan said, "but it's not a social call." Sam nodded once, stepping aside. "Come in, then. Coffee's on." Inside, the lighthouse keeper's quarters were surprisingly warm. Maps and nautical charts covered one wall, along with an old radio console and a pile of maintenance logs. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and burnt coffee. Lila sat near the heater while Sam poured 3 mugs, studying her with quiet curiosity. "Name's Sam Keller," he said. "You must be the reason my old friend looks like he's running a war again." Lila managed a small smile. "Lila Cooper. And I think the war found him first." Sam grunted. "That tracks." He turned to Ethan. "You said this was about Blue Harbor. You weren't kidding, were you?" Ethan shook his head. "You've heard of them?" "Hard not to," Sam said, sitting heavily in a wooden chair. "They've been leasing half the southern coast for research, but nobody knows what kind. I see their ships passing at night. No running lights, no flags. Sometimes I hear engines offshore long after curfew. My guess? They're moving something they don't want anyone to see." Ethan reached into his jacket and placed the small metal tag from the dead intruder on the table. Sam turned it over, eyes narrowing. "PH, security," he read aloud. "So it's true. They're militarizing." Lila leaned forward. "There's more. They're recovering tech from classified Navy wrecks. Experimental submersibles, guidance systems, things that shouldn't exist outside government control. Grady's behind it. He's Blue Harbor's security director now." Sam looked up sharply. "Grady? Tom Grady? Jesus, Ethan? That son of a bitch is still breathing?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "And he's looking for me." Sam rubbed a hand across his beard, exhaling through his teeth. "I thought he died with the rest of them." "You sure? I saw the evidence. One of his men came for us last night. Didn't make it back." Sam nodded slowly, as if filing away the information. Then he reached under the desk and pulled out a thick, weathered folder. "You're not the first one asking questions about Blue Harbor," he said. Inside were photographs, grainy images of cargo ships unloading at night, crates marked with military serials, divers in unmarked wetsuits. One photo caught Ethan's attention, a half-submerged vessel off the coast, its hull number blacked out. "What's this?" Ethan asked. "Decommissioned destroyer," Sam replied. "Officially sunk during training, but last month it turned up 5 miles from here, under Blue Harbor control. They called it an environmental study, but I've seen the kind of equipment they use. Sonar arrays, sub-drones, and," he hesitated, tapping one image, "military recovery units." Lila's voice trembled. "That's where they're hiding the evidence." "Exactly," Sam said. "But if you're thinking of going after it, you'd better be ready. Grady's got mercs patrolling those waters, ex-special ops. The kind of men who shoot first and let the tide do the cleaning." Ethan leaned over the map pinned on the wall, the coastline marked with red circles. "Which one?" Sam pointed to a small inlet north of Havenport. "Here. The wreck they're working on is lodged under the reef. They've been using old salvage channels to move equipment. If you follow the tide schedule, you can get close without being spotted." Lila's hand trembled as she traced the spot on the map. "If we get there, I can recover the original sonar drives. That's the proof we need to shut them down." Ethan studied her. The fear in her eyes mixed with something else. Resolve. "Then we go tonight," he said. Sam frowned. "You're serious?" "I owe Grady more than a bullet," Ethan said quietly, "and I'm done running." For a long moment the only sound was the wind against the glass. Then Sam stood, walking to the cabinet. He opened it, revealing a small arsenal, rifles, flares, dive gear. "You'll need this," he said, handing Ethan a waterproof case. "And one more thing." He retrieved a folded chart, edges frayed. "This is the tide map for the next 2 days. The current changes at midnight. If you hit the inlet after that, you'll have half an hour before the patrol boats swing back." Ethan took it, nodding. "You're not coming?" Sam hesitated. "I keep the light on for ships, not wars." Then he added, softer, "But if you don't make it back, I'll make damn sure the world knows why." Rex barked once, as if acknowledging the pact. As they prepared to leave, the fog outside began to thin. From the cliff, Ethan could see faint outlines of boats far out at sea. Too small for cargo, too deliberate in their movements. "Patrols?" Lila asked. "Or scavengers," Sam said grimly. "Either way, they're waiting." Ethan tightened the strap on his duffel. "Then let's not disappoint them." When they reached the truck again, the first hint of dusk was creeping over the horizon. Lila climbed in beside Rex, who pressed his head against her arm, as if sensing the danger ahead. Ethan glanced once more toward the lighthouse. Sam stood in the doorway, the beam sweeping over him like a spotlight. He raised a hand in silent farewell. Ethan started the engine. "Hold on," he said. "It's going to be a long night." The truck rumbled to life, headlights cutting through the fog. Behind them, the lighthouse beam turned slowly toward the sea, marking the path they would take, a thin line of light against the coming dark. Midnight turned the coast into a world of shadows and whispering wind. The tide was beginning to rise, black water surging quietly between the rocks. Ethan Ward steered the small fishing boat Sam had lent them, its motor barely a murmur beneath the crash of distant waves. The cold bit at his face, salt stinging his lips. Beside him, Lila Cooper gripped the railing, her knuckles white under her gloves. She wore a dark waterproof jacket that swallowed her small frame, her dark hair tied back, eyes fixed on the horizon. Rex, the German shepherd, sat near the bow, ears pricked, his sable fur gleaming in the low red light from the control panel. He looked like a sentinel, carved from the storm itself. Fully ahead, through the fog, the skeletal silhouette of the wrecked yacht Silver Wave emerged, the same vessel where Ethan had found Lila days earlier. The waves licked its tilted hull like something hungry. The storm that once nearly destroyed it had now left it stranded in silence, leaning against the reef like a ghost that refused to sink. Ethan killed the engine. "We go quiet from here." They drifted closer, using oars to close the distance. The night smelled of oil and rust. As they climbed aboard, the deck groaned beneath their weight. Lila shivered. "It feels different now." "It is," Ethan said, scanning the shadows. "They've been here since we left." Rex padded ahead, nose low, tail stiff. He paused near the cabin hatch and gave a short, low bark. Ethan knelt beside him, running a gloved hand along the floorboards. The faint imprint of boots, large, military pattern, cut into the salt-crusted surface. "Patrol," he muttered, "less than 12 hours old." They descended into the lower deck. The air was colder there, still thick with the metallic tang of old blood and fuel. Lila switched on a small flashlight, its beam cutting through dust motes. At the end of the corridor, the storage hatch loomed half open. Inside, 3 shapes lay slumped against the wall. Lila's breath caught. Bodies. Ethan moved closer, jaw tightening. The men were dressed in dark tactical uniforms, hands bound behind them. 2 were dead, bullet wounds to the chest, but one wore the torn remains of a U.S. military vest. Ethan crouched, brushing mud from the ID tag around the man's neck. Sergeant M. Danner, U.S. Navy Salvage Division. "Jesus," he whispered, "they weren't Blue Harbor. They were American." Lila knelt beside him, covering her mouth. "Then they killed their own." Ethan nodded grimly. "To bury it deeper." He searched the bodies quickly, finding a waterproof case strapped under one corpse's arm, metal, heavy, the lock scorched by heat. "This is what they came for," he said, handing it to Lila. She examined the markings. "Same manufacturer as the sonar drives. This might hold the original data." "Then let's not open it here," Ethan said. "We'll take it back to the lighthouse." Rex stiffened suddenly, ears twitching. Then came the sound, faint at first, like a distant hum, then sharper, the growl of engines. Lila turned toward the porthole. Two beams of white light cut across the water, approaching fast. "They found us," she whispered. Ethan grabbed her arm. "Move. We're not fighting them in this tin can." They climbed up the stairs, the deck shaking under the impact of waves. The beams grew brighter, two motorboats circling the wreck like sharks. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker, distorted by static and distance. "Ethan Ward," it said. The voice was deep, familiar, and cold. "You should have stayed buried." Lila froze. "Grady." Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. "Stay low." The spotlight locked on them. "You took something of mine," Grady's voice continued. "Throw it overboard, and maybe I'll let you breathe another hour." Ethan shouted back, "You've killed enough men for one lifetime, Grady. I'm done letting you choose who gets to live." A pause, then came a low, cruel laugh. "Always the hero. You really think anyone cares anymore?" The first shot tore through the hull, splintering metal and wood. Lila ducked as sparks rained from a shattered railing. Ethan pulled her behind the mast, returning fire with Sam's rifle. One shot, precise. It hit the side of a motorboat, sending one of the mercenaries sprawling. "Rex, down!" Ethan yelled. The dog stayed at his side, teeth bared, growling toward the lights. Lila crawled toward the stern, dragging the metal case behind her. "Ethan!" she shouted. "They're flanking." He turned just as a second motorboat drew closer. A man jumped aboard, rifle raised. Rex lunged before Ethan could react, slamming into the man's legs and knocking him flat. The gun went off, the bullet ricocheting into the mast. Ethan tackled the man, wrenching the weapon away and throwing him into the sea. The air reeked of gunpowder and salt. Another spotlight swept across the deck, blinding him for a moment. And in that white glare, Ethan saw him. Tom Grady. Standing on the bow of the lead motorboat, coat flapping in the wind, face hard and lean. His hair, once dark, was now streaked with gray, his jaw scarred by a deep burn. His eyes were ice. "I told them you were already dead," Grady shouted. "Guess I'll have to fix that mistake myself." Ethan raised his rifle. "You don't have to try twice." The sea exploded with light and thunder. Bullets struck the deck as Ethan returned fire. Lila crawled toward the helm, trying to reach the distress transmitter, but the cable sparked uselessly, ripped out. "Ethan," she cried, "we're cut off." Grady leaped from his boat as it scraped against the wreck, landing hard on the deck. He moved with the precision of a soldier, sidearm drawn. The two men circled each other among the wreckage, the storm flashing around them. "You left me there," Grady hissed. "You and your damn morals." "You killed my team," Ethan shot back. "You traded lives for money." "I traded ghosts for survival," Grady's voice cracked. "You think loyalty means anything to the dead?" He fired. The bullet grazed Ethan's arm. Rex barked, charging forward, but Ethan shouted, "Stay!" and lunged at Grady, tackling him against the broken mast. The gun skidded away into the dark water. They fought hand to hand, grunts and curses drowned by the sea. Grady was still fast, but Ethan fought with something more than anger, memory, guilt, and the ghost of every man they'd buried. He slammed Grady's head into the railing, but the older man countered with a vicious punch that sent blood spraying from Ethan's lip. "Always the hero," Grady gasped, pressing his forearm against Ethan's throat. "Still can't see the world for what it is." Before Ethan could break free, a deafening roar echoed, the whir of an approaching wave crashing against the side of the ship. The deck tilted sharply. Both men lost balance. Grady grabbed Ethan's collar, pulling him close. "When this is over," he hissed, "they'll erase both our names." Then Rex moved. The shepherd lunged from the side, slamming into Grady's leg, tearing fabric and flesh. Grady howled in pain, kicking the dog away. The pistol he'd dropped skittered across the deck, straight toward Lila. She grabbed it, hands shaking, pointing it at him. "Stop!" Grady laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "You won't shoot." The next shot wasn't hers. It was Ethan's. Grady staggered, eyes wide, a red bloom spreading across his chest. The storm swallowed the sound as he fell backward over the railing, vanishing into the churning dark below. For a long moment only the sea moved. Lila lowered the gun, breathing hard. Rex limped to Ethan's side, his fur streaked with blood, not his own this time. Ethan looked over the edge, but saw only black water and foam. "He's gone," he said quietly. Lila's voice trembled. "Are you sure?" "No," Ethan admitted, "but the ocean keeps its secrets." They stood in silence until the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, washing the wreck in pale gold. Ethan turned to her. "Let's get out of here before the tide does what Grady couldn't." They climbed back into their boat, the metal case secured under Ethan's arm. As they pushed away, Rex turned once more toward the wreck, ears perked, as if expecting something, or someone, to rise again from the waves. But the sea remained still. Behind them, the silver wave finally shifted, groaning one last time before sinking beneath the water, a graveyard for ghosts and secrets alike. The storm came in without warning. By dusk, the sea had turned black, its surface boiling under the wind. The radio crackled with static, the clouds pressed low like a ceiling about to collapse. Ethan Ward tightened his grip on the tiller, eyes squinting through the rain that came down like broken glass. Beside him, Lila Cooper held the metal case to her chest, one hand gripping the edge of the small boat as waves slammed against its side. Rex, the German shepherd, crouched low near her feet, fur soaked, amber eyes locked on Ethan as if waiting for his command. The wreck of the silver wave had vanished behind them, swallowed by the storm and the sea. Ahead, the cliffs of Havenport loomed like dark walls, their shapes flickering under each flash of lightning. The wind screamed across the deck. "We're not going to make the harbor before it hits," Lila shouted over the noise. "We'll make it," Ethan said, his voice hard. "Hold on." Another wave crashed, nearly flipping them. The case slipped from Lila's hands, skidding across the deck. She lunged for it just as a bolt of lightning hit the water nearby. The shock wave sent a spray of salt across their faces. Rex barked sharply, his paws braced on the slick wood. Then, a sound through the wind, the faint hum of an engine. Ethan looked up. Through the rain, faint red lights flickered, a motorboat closing in. "They're still out here," Ethan muttered. "Who?" Lila asked, but she didn't need an answer. The shape of the approaching boat was all too familiar, dark, fast, purposeful. Blue Harbor's men hadn't come for survivors. They'd come to finish what Grady started. Ethan swung the tiller hard, cutting the lights. "We'll lose them in the rocks," he said. The motor roared behind them. Bullets hissed into the water, splintering wood. Rex barked furiously. "Down!" Ethan shouted, pushing Lila to the floor. The case clattered beside them as another round hit the railing. He turned the boat toward the cliffs, steering through narrow passages between jagged reefs. The waves rose higher, smashing against stone. The pursuing boat followed, its searchlight cutting through the rain. Ethan's pulse pounded. The lighthouse beam flashed faintly in the distance, Sam's light, barely visible through the storm. "Almost there," Ethan growled. A rogue wave hit from the side, throwing the small boat onto its edge. Lila screamed, clutching the case. Rex lost his footing and slammed into the deck, yelping. Ethan grabbed for him, his hand slipping on the wet metal. Another hit, louder, the sound of the hull cracking. The motor sputtered, died. "Ethan!" Lila shouted. "We're taking on water." He looked down, seawater already ankle-deep. "Get the flare!" he yelled. Before she could reach for it, another explosion of light illuminated the cliffs. The pursuing boat had fired a flare round, not to signal, but to find them. Its crimson glow lit the sea. Blood red. Ethan grabbed his rifle, aimed through the rain, and fired once. The flare boat's engine sparked, then burst into flame. A scream echoed over the wind before the storm swallowed it whole. But victory came too late. Their own boat lurched, wood splitting as it struck an unseen rock. The impact threw Ethan forward. He hit the deck hard. The world spun. When he came to, he was half submerged, the wreck groaning under the waves. "Lila!" he shouted. No answer. "Rex!" A bark cut through the rain, faint, but there. He turned toward the sound. Rex stood on a half-sunken rock near the broken mast, drenched, trembling, but alive. Beside him, half in the water, Lila clung to the floating metal case. Her lips were blue. "Ethan!" she gasped. "I can't." He dove, fighting the current, each wave a hammer of freezing salt. He reached her, pulling her toward the rocks. The case slipped from her hands, vanishing beneath the churning sea. "No!" she screamed, reaching for it. Ethan held her back. "It's gone!" Lightning cracked again, and in its flash, Ethan saw another figure, clinging to debris not far away. The impossible. Tom Grady. He was alive. Barely. His face pale, eyes wild, clutching a piece of the wreck. Ethan froze. Grady met his gaze through the rain. "You can't stop it," he shouted hoarsely. "They'll keep digging." Then the sea took him again, dragging him under for good this time. Ethan turned away, pulling Lila toward the rocks. Rex swam ahead, barking, finding footing on the slippery stone ledge. The wind howled louder, the tide rising faster. "Come on," Ethan growled, pushing Lila upward. She collapsed onto the rock, coughing. A massive wave reared up behind them, blotting out the lighthouse beam. Rex barked once, a warning, and leapt toward Ethan just as the wave crashed. The impact tore them apart. When the water receded, Ethan found himself clinging to a broken railing, his lungs burning. "Rex!" he shouted, voice raw. No answer. He turned, scanning the water, heart pounding. Then, a faint movement. The dog struggled in the waves, one leg dragging. Without thinking, Ethan dove again, ignoring the pain in his ribs. He reached Rex just as another current hit. The shepherd whimpered, but didn't fight. Ethan wrapped an arm around him and kicked toward the rocks. Lila reached down, helping pull them both up. Rex collapsed on the stone, blood mixing with seawater near his flank. Ethan ripped off his jacket, pressing it to the wound. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Stay." The lighthouse beam swept over them again, a ghostly halo through the mist. Somewhere above, a voice shouted. A horn blared. Ethan looked up to see the faint outline of a Coast Guard cutter cutting through the waves, its searchlights slicing the storm. "They saw us," Lila gasped. Ethan held Rex close, his hand trembling. The dog's breathing was shallow, each exhale a faint tremor. "You're gonna make it," Ethan said, voice breaking. "You hear me, boy? You're gonna make it." Rex's eyes flickered open, gold and dim in the rain. His tail moved once, a weak thump against Ethan's knee. Then the floodlight hit them full. Rescue ropes dropped. Figures shouted over the roar. Ethan lifted Rex first, then helped Lila. By the time they reached the deck, the storm had begun to fade, leaving only rain and silence. He sat there on the cold metal, cradling Rex as medics worked, his whole body shaking. The dog's paw rested weakly against his arm. "Good boy," Ethan whispered, his throat tight. "You did it." The sea around them was littered with wreckage, fragments of the silver wave, twisted and broken. As dawn began to bleed through the clouds, the lighthouse beam dimmed, giving way to the first light of morning. Ethan looked back toward the cliffs, toward the place where the tide had nearly taken them all. "It's over," Lila said softly beside him. But Ethan didn't answer. He just looked down at Rex, then toward the horizon, where stormlight met sunrise, and whispered, "Not until he wakes." Morning came slowly, peeling back the storm like an old scar. The sea had fallen silent, its waves exhausted, its fury spent. Gray light crept over Havenport's battered cliffs and down to the harbor, where the Coast Guard cutter lay anchored, engines humming softly. Ethan Ward sat on the deck, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the horizon, where the storm had vanished. His hands trembled faintly, not from the cold, but from everything the sea had taken, and everything it had decided, just this once, to return. Rex lay beside him on a stretcher, breathing shallowly but alive. His sable fur was bandaged near the flank, glistening faintly with antiseptic under the morning sun. A medic moved quietly, checking vitals. "He's stable," she said. "We've stopped the bleeding. He just needs rest, and a bit of luck." Ethan nodded, voice low. "He's got both." Lila Cooper, sitting nearby with a thermal blanket around her shoulders, turned to him. Her face was pale, her hair tangled with salt and wind, but her eyes, the same steady blue-green that had once stared down death on the silver wave, were clear now. "They said they found wreckage from the other boats," she said quietly. "But not Grady." Ethan exhaled slowly, watching the gulls circling above. "He's gone," he murmured, "but some ghosts don't stay buried long." She didn't argue. The sea, after all, had its own ways of keeping secrets. Hours later they docked at Havenport. The small coastal town that had slept through so much violence looked almost peaceful again. Fishermen repairing nets, children playing near the pier, the lighthouse beam still sweeping lazily across the water. Waiting at the dock was Commander Alan Briggs, the same man who had led the rescue the last time Havenport faced tragedy. His uniform was immaculate despite the drizzle, his gray eyes both stern and kind. "Ward," Briggs said, shaking Ethan's hand firmly, "hell of a mess you stumbled into." Ethan gave a tired half-smile. "Didn't exactly stumble." Briggs's gaze flicked toward Lila, who stood beside him holding the waterproof case, dented, scarred, but miraculously intact. "You recovered this from the wreck?" She nodded. "It's got the data Blue Harbor wanted to erase. Everything. Sonar maps, salvage records, coordinates of illegal dives. Enough to bury them legally this time." Briggs gestured to an officer to take the case. "Then you've done the hard part. My team will handle the rest." Lila hesitated. "And Grady?" Briggs sighed. "Search teams are still combing the coastline. Until we find a body, he's a fugitive. But with what's in that case, he won't have a company left to hide behind." As the officers loaded equipment, Briggs looked back at Ethan. "You've got a knack for surviving impossible things, Ward. Ever considered doing something that doesn't try to kill you?" Ethan gave a weary grin. "Thinking about it. Good, because the country could use a few more men who remember what loyalty looks like." Briggs left, his crew following. For a moment, Havenport was quiet again. The only sound the waves brushing against the pier and Rex's slow, even breathing. 3 months later, spring returned to Havenport. The sea had softened into shades of blue and silver. The gulls louder now, the air warmer. The lighthouse shone brighter, its paint fresh, its keeper no longer alone. On the bluff overlooking the harbor stood a new wooden sign: Havenport Rescue Foundation for Veterans and Working Dogs. Ethan hammered the last nail into the post, stepping back to admire the view. Behind him, the renovated boathouse gleamed, freshly painted, fitted with kennels, a training yard, and a small classroom. Lila stood near the doorway, clipboard in hand, her hair tied back neatly, her clothes practical but clean. She looked more at peace than she had since he met her. "I never thought I'd see this place built," she said, smiling faintly. Ethan shrugged, glancing toward the sea. "You learn to build things out of what's left." Rex, now fully healed, trotted across the yard with his usual grace. A faint scar marked his flank, but it didn't slow him down. He wore a new harness, simple, no insignia, just a brass tag that read Rex, Search and Rescue. He barked once, proudly, before dropping a rope at Ethan's feet. Ethan chuckled, training himself again. "He's ready," Lila said, "and so are you." He looked at her, brow furrowed. "Ready for what?" "To stop running." For a moment Ethan didn't answer. The wind tugged at his jacket, carrying the smell of salt and pine. He looked toward the lighthouse, its beam sweeping across the horizon like a guardian's eye. "You really think we can do some good here?" "I know we can," Lila said softly. "We already have." Behind them a car pulled up. An old pickup, paint faded but engine steady. Sam Keller stepped out, carrying a box of supplies. He looked healthier now, the deep lines on his face softened by time and sunlight. "You still owe me a boat," he said with a grin. Ethan laughed, genuine this time. "Add it to the list." Sam's gaze moved to Rex. "Good to see the soldiers still standing." "Always," Ethan replied. They worked through the day, setting up fences, checking the generator, installing nameplates. As evening fell, Havenport's harbor glowed gold beneath the setting sun. The lighthouse beam turned slow circles across the water. Later, as dusk deepened, Ethan sat on the porch of the Foundation's small cabin. Rex lay at his feet, head resting on his boots, eyes half closed. Lila stood by the railing, looking out at the sea, where everything had begun. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked softly. Ethan didn't need to ask who she meant. "Grady?" He nodded. "Sometimes. Men like him don't just die. They dissolve into the stories no one wants to tell." Lila turned, her voice gentle. "And men like you?" He smiled faintly. "We build new ones." The sky burned orange and violet as the sun sank below the horizon. The first stars appeared, faint and flickering. Somewhere out there, the tide whispered against the ruins of ships long forgotten. Rex lifted his head, ears twitching. His gaze fixed on the horizon, where the faint beam of the lighthouse touched the sea. Ethan followed it, his heart strangely calm. "Not everyone finds their way home," he said quietly. "But sometimes loyalty shows us how." The lighthouse light swept across them, man, dog, and the woman who had refused to give up, and the harbor shone, alive once more. Sometimes God doesn't send miracles wrapped in thunder or light. Sometimes He sends them quietly, in the bark of a loyal dog, in the strength of a wounded man who refuses to give up, and in the second chances that arrive after the storm. Ethan thought the war had taken everything from him. But through pain and loss, he found that faith, like loyalty, never truly dies. It just waits for the right moment to shine again. And when the sea grew dark, when hope seemed too small to hold, God sent a light, through Rex's courage, through Lila's strength, through the promise of a new dawn. Because miracles don't always part the seas. Sometimes they just help you find your way home. So if this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need hope tonight. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and who in your life has been your Rex, your guiding light when the tide was against you. Don't forget to subscribe, because every week we share stories that remind us faith, loyalty, and love are still alive in this world. May God bless you, protect your home, and light your path, even in the darkest storms.